classic cars, then Donald loves you.
Like many small volume manufacturers of high-end cars, whether they be luxury or sports cars, Lamborghini has had a very checkered history. Lots of different owners, lots of business plans, lots of models that came and went. But Lamborghini is still here. I'm driving a 1998 Lamborghini Diablo SV Monterey edition. And at this point in its history, Lamborghini had found the white knight in Chrysler. Leo Iacocca, of course, always had a soft spot for Italian manufacturers from his days back at Ford when we did the deal with De Tomaso and the Pantera. And there was just something about Lamborghini that kept attracting rescuers. The company that Ferruccio Lamborghini founded in 1963, however, was a very different company than the one that Chrysler took over. Basically, there was one model, the Countach, and this, the Diablo, is a successor to that legendary car. And when asked what defines a Lamborghini, the company itself would say that a Lamborghini is a slightly absurd car because it's not meant to be something practical. Now, that's very interesting, of course, now that Lamborghini has introduced their first and inevitable SUV or crossover, the Urus. But this, the Diablo, is a Lamborghini from a very different kind of Lamborghini company. A company that sold dreams and fantasies. Lamborghini never went racing as a factory. They supplied engines to companies. In fact, during their Chrysler years, they supplied engines to Formula One teams. And the engine was not bad, apparently, but it's just a bit heavy. But nonetheless, Ferruccio Lamborghini was quite famously opposed to racing. Perhaps it was because Enzo Ferrari was totally concentrated on racing, who knows. But perhaps it was also because he was a smart guy who realized that, as the saying goes, the best way to make a small fortune in racing is to start with a large one. So Lamborghini was never about racing. Lamborghini was about very high profile, high style, fast driving. Making a statement, making people know that you'd arrived. Lamborghinis are not for people who are shrinking violets or shy and retiring. And the Diablo is a car that certainly fits that mold. It's very dramatically styled, designed by Marcello Gandini, who penned many of the late Lamborghinis. And it certainly bears a resemblance, an homage, not a resemblance, certainly an homage to the Countach, but it is very much a shape of its age, of the 1980s. It's almost, dare I say, slightly psychedelic, I don't know. It's got this sort of form that is both sensuous and somehow droopy at the same time. I don't know how to describe it, actually. But it somehow all works. It's a very big car, and yet the design actually is pretty good. Now, I say it's a very big car. Here inside the cockpit, there's not a lot of room. That's one of the challenges of a big V12 mid-engine car, is that the passengers are very much an afterthought. It's all about the engine. As is the case in many such cars, you sit very far forward and with your legs askew towards the center line because the front wheel arches intrude where your left foot would normally go. And you do get used to it after a while, but nonetheless, it's something that you do have to get used to. The pedal box is not very wide. Between the wheel arch and the pedals and the steering column, there's not a lot of room underneath the dashboard, so you have to make allowances. But one of the things that make some of those allowances worthwhile is what's coming in behind your ear. That engine is very well insulated, but not at all isolated. You can hear every note of its glorious song. And that's what this car is all about. The sound of that engine, the grunt, the push in your back, when you press down on the accelerator. I had a 1969 Lamborghini Islero, a front-engine V12 Lamborghini, and one of the things that I really loved about it and I thought really characterized the car was the fact that all the controls were quite heavy. You really felt the mechanical nature of the car. You pressed down on the accelerator and you knew you were opening the throttle controls for 6 carburetors. And when you shifted gears, it was metal. It was there. And although obviously this is a totally different setup than the Islero or any of the other front-engine Lamborghinis, it still has that same feel. And I think that's a characteristic of Lamborghini that you want. This is not a light car. It's not an easy car. It's what used to be called sort of a man's car, but that's of course ridiculous because there are women who can drive cars with heavy controls just as well as any man can. But it is that kind of a car. It's not a car that you sort of easily cruise around in, shifting with your fingertips and holding on with 2 pinkies. Not that kind of car at all. And that's what makes it very rewarding, and that's what makes it slightly exhausting as well. Much like a Ferrari Daytona, or like a 1950s, a 58 fuel-injected Corvette, you have to want to drive. The car has to be driven. You can't just go out for a little stroll in it. That's not what they're made for. That's not what is rewarding about them. And if you want to do a drive like that, you'll absolutely hate this car, a Daytona, or a fuel leak Corvette in about 20 minutes because you'll be done. But when you put your foot in it, this is what it's all about. This is what makes it worthwhile. You all know who watch these videos that I'm a former opera singer, and I love making operatic illusions, and I also always talk about the operatic quality of Italian engines. Two baritones out for an afternoon's drive. This Lamborghini and I sing beautiful duets together, don't you think? Ultimately, the Diablo is a really silly car. It's outrageous looking, it's outrageous sounding, but that's what it does. That's what it was designed to do. So it's extremely successful in carrying out its mission. And isn't that what you want from a car? To be what you want it to be what the builders intended it to be.